All right, so today is November 19th, and this is the fifth session in this class on the book Approaching the Buddhist Path by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron. What we'll be doing today is wrapping up the discussion about emptiness, which we started actually 2 classes ago. I just had 1 or 2 other points that I wanted to pick up. And then we will move on to chapter 3, which is about mind and the emotions. We won't get through the whole chapter, but the first third or so of that chapter, right? So we're going to go ahead and do some of the preliminary prayers that we used to do when Geshe Along was here with us. So I'm going to share the file. Hopefully you can see this. 1 more mouse click. Namo Guru Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Namo Buddhaya Namo Dharmaya Namo Sanghaya. Here is a ground anointed with incense and strewn with flowers, with Mount Meru adorned by the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. Visualized as a Buddha field, I offer it to the merit field. May all beings partake of supremely pure Buddha field. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Daryatayam. Sangye Chudang Soki Chongnam Changchun Bardu Dangni Kyapsuji Daki Jinsu Chunyen Gipe Chongnam Gi Trola Benshi Sangye Drumpar Shung. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until enlightenment. By the merit of listening to the Dharma, may I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. So Geshe Darge in the Sunday class has been talking about emptiness quite a bit. So I don't want to repeat anything that he has already said. But I wanted to just pick up like 1 or 2 quick points. Maybe this will be, a bit of a review. So in the last class, we were talking about how we use language to label things, and how a term or a label is comes together with its definition, at the same time. So I wanted to just touch on that a little bit more. And so that relationship between the term or the label and its meaning and its definition is interesting. So, for example, and this is just taken straight out of the book. Actually, this may be from Appearing and Empty, the other book in the series, a little further down in the series. But phenomena are not totally non-existent before they are imputed. Let me get this out of the way. They're not totally non-existent. That means they still exist even before we label them. So, something could be out there. It may have a different name, or a slightly different meaning, but it's out there somewhere. Another aspect is that some phenomena may only come into being, meaning they only come to our awareness. They come into being at the same time as they're labeled, as they're so designated. And the classic example is a president, right? So there may be a person out there, but he's just like an ordinary person, right? Or she. That didn't happen, but when that person is labeled as the president, then that person takes on a whole new meaning, a whole new role, right? Almost becomes like a whole new person, right? You're a president, okay? So when the label, the president, is affixed to the person, then that president comes into being. And then likewise, when the person, leaves office, then that president label is no longer applied to that individual, and he's no longer the president. Okay. Then another way to think about this is that some things come into being after they're designated. So for example, the example that's given is like my future lives. Okay. So that doesn't exist until it's similar, right? It doesn't come into being until some come into being after they're designated. That seems like it'd be similar to the president, but they come into being after they're designated, like my future lives. And then the last way to think about this is that some existed before the names existed. So we talked about that, I think, in the last class. The example given was like a disease like cancer or COVID. So even though we were not aware of those, diseases, they were still out there. They just hadn't been, named. Okay, so those are 4 different ways in which a term or a label and its definition could arise in these different ways. And then another aspect of this idea about labeling and bringing things into existence for us is that there's a difference between something that we understand merely on the basis of words versus something that we understand through our direct, personal experience. So if somebody describes a place to you, like that you've never been to before, then you would have kind of a book way of knowing that place. But that would be very different than if you actually traveled there and could have the full body and emotional experience of your personal experience, right? So that seems pretty obvious, but as you go about your daily routine, then you can try to think of examples, of the different ways in which we understand and experience these different objects, right? So then learning and being able to become familiar, with new objects, new concepts. We're learning, every day we learn something new, right? We come into across new experiences, new events, and that's a process of learning. And with the acquisition of language, then we can start out understanding how, one label applies to a phenomena in one particular context, right? And then we need to be able to take that same label and object out into the wild, right? Into different contexts and see, does it preserve the same meaning or does it take on, a different meaning? And that's all part of, learning a language and applying it in daily life. And so to give another example of the same concept, in the previous class, we were talking about how children and how animals, are able to navigate, their universes very successfully in the absence of language. They still manage to get around just fine. So to give an example of how, like language learning, I was thinking, like, if you're training a dog, right? If you start out and you say, sit, you teach a dog how to sit, but you're in, the living room, right? Then dogs are, according to humans, dogs have difficulty generalizing, more difficulty than we would. So sit in the living room, they wouldn't automatically realize that if you went to the kitchen and you said sit, that same command, that same hand gesture still means this. This is still meant to evoke the same response, sitting in as it did in the living room. So, likewise, we need to, as I was just saying, this idea of generalizing our understanding is one that's important to pay attention to, I think. All right. Because that gets at that idea of generic images, that we have in our minds. All right. So then moving on in the text, there was the next section is dependent arising and the three jewels. So this, I actually have some slides here. So let me see if I can share my slides. More slides. Here we go. These are all old slides. Oh. There's the objects. Oh, yeah. I think we're going to skip this. So this slide presentation just has some eye candy. So there's a quote from the book, and I'm sorry, I don't have the page numbers because I don't have a physical copy of the book. I'm just using a EPUB version. So the bottom line behind this idea of dependent arising is that everything comes together as a relationship. So we need to understand things in relationship with other phenomena. And so everything is empty of independent existence, empty of inherent existence, meaning that it doesn't exist in isolation, right? It doesn't exist, from its own side, in and of itself. Instead, it depends on causes and conditions, on parts, and the conceiving and the designating or the labeling mind, right? Which is what we were just talking about. So when we think of a tree, for example, if you think of a tree and you focus repeatedly on the branches, the trunk, the twigs, and the leaves arranged in a certain manner, and then you ask the question, what makes this collection of things a tree? Then you'll begin to understand that it's neither the individual parts nor the collection of those parts that is a tree, and that the tree exists by being merely designated independence on its parts. Now, not just its parts, but the conceiving and designating mind. Right? And so one of the questions that came up in the last class that I think we should keep addressing as we go through the material, today is how do we apply this understanding of emptiness that we are developing slowly in our daily lives, in our meditation, right? And why is this important to do so? And so by continuing to investigate how our mind, is that really interesting that interaction and how we perceive, interpret the world around us, then this allows us to develop insight into the functions of the mind and the different types and levels of consciousness operating within us. And then the authors write, we also come to appreciate that although some of our emotional states seem so strong and their objects appear so vividly, they are in fact similar to illusions in that they do not exist in the way they appear to us. So that was the purpose of this image, because it's supposed to look like an illusion. It's actually the reflection of two houses in a pond. Although it looks like the house is in the pond, right? It looks like or they're upside down, but it's not. So likewise, everything that many of our mental states are like that. They're just sort of, tricks, mistaken perception. Okay, so moving on, the next section is the possibility of ending dukkha, suffering. And so cyclic existence does not arise without a cause, or from a discordant cause, unrelated cause, or from a permanent creator. Rather, cyclic existence arises from an undisciplined, ignorant mind. So that's the good news in a way, right? As we've talked about this before, but ignorant mind means that that's something that we as individuals can control. And so it's our responsibility to tame our minds. And we can absolutely do that. And slowly, 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 we can eventually purify it and return it in a sense, return it into its pure, uncontaminated. I shouldn't say that, not return it, because it's all that pure, uncontaminated state of mind is always within us. It's more a question of clearing away the consciousness known as ignorance that prevents us from remaining in that state. So by removing the ignorance that obscures our knowledge of all phenomena, then the ability to perceive all objects is possible. So that again means that ignorance is adventitious, that it's something that we can kick out, can be eliminated through analysis and reasoning. And cutting it stops perpetuation in cyclic existence. And it results in the state of Buddhahood, which is omniscient. Right? So that's why the quote above says the ability to perceive all objects. So when you think of how limited our ability to understand the universe is right now, there's so many phenomena that we cannot understand. For example, let's see, what would some examples be? Our past lives, right? The workings of karma. So anything that's known as like a hidden or very hidden phenomena, those are things that a Buddha would be able to understand, but we cannot. So there are many things in that category. So taking a closer look at wisdom. So wisdom is the antidote to ignorance, right? And so here's a quote. Inherent existence, also called existence from its own side, is called the object of negation. It's what is refuted or negated by analysis and reasoning. Once the analysis is complete, the consciousness realizing that persons and phenomena do not exist from their own side is generated in our mind stream. This wisdom consciousness damages and eventually completely overcomes the conception and grasping that objects exist inherently. So I think what's important to just point out, though, is that conventional existence is not refuted by wisdom. Right? So objects do exist, and when wisdom has been realized, as I mentioned actually just a minute ago, then mind's true nature or Buddha nature is then perfectly revealed. So I just wanted to make that point that even though wisdom is able to show us that things don't exist inherently, that does not mean that they do not exist at all. Okay, and then finally, there was this really, really beautiful quote that I wanted to just to read through slowly with you, and I put it on the slide to make this easier. But here it says, dependent arising also underlies the four truths. Through such reflection and analysis, we understand that the self-grasping ignorance that misapprehends reality gives rise to our mental afflictions. That's the true origins. The second truth, and that these in turn bring about the suffering we experience. So that's true sufferings, the first noble truth. Understanding dependent arising also enables us to realize the lack of independent existence of persons and phenomena, their emptiness. This wisdom realizing emptiness, true paths, has the power to overcome all ignorance, wrong views, and afflictions because they lack a valid basis. While emptiness and dependent arising can be proven by reasoning as well as directly experienced. Through this, we will appreciate that a state exists in which all ignorance and afflictions have been removed. This is nirvana, true cessations, the third truth. Thus, the Dharma, jewel, true cessation, and true paths exists. So that's a beautiful way of summarizing the Four Noble Truths and showing how dependent arising is related to each of these four different aspects, right? So I don't think I'm going to say anything more than that. I think it's just a really good summary of everything that we've been talking about over the past couple of classes related to emptiness, right? So then we're going to move on. Does anybody have any comments?
Yeah, Annie, you said this was a quote. I'm just wondering, is this from the textbook that you're
Yeah,
quoting this, or
yeah, that's
so we'll, sorry to
approaching.
interrupt. So you don't know the page numbers, but we'll be able to find it, no problem. You
It's in
just
the section of the book called The Possibility of Ending Dukkha.
oh, good, okay.
So it's
And
the
also, I don't know if you have time for questions, but there's something that's sort of curious to me still, and I think this would be a good time to ask it. But do you want me to not ask it or ask it?
no, go ahead.
Okay, so it was kind of last week it aroused my suspicion, and today I think you've come upon it again. And I've got a real lot of problem with emptiness. So this is, I think, one of the reasons I have the problem. So, I think we agree that if phenomena had an independent identity that's independent of other, we should be able to find it as an independent essence with no causal dependence, no dependent, designation, right?
Mhm.
That I agree we cannot do. But you said something before, and I think you brought it up again today. All existent objects exist only by, and then I think the two things are labeling and causal dependence or you know causality, right?
Uh-huh.
So I get the causality. The labeling is confusing. And you talked today, you said it's simultaneous. The labeling and the coming
Definition.
into existence. Yeah, the
Yeah.
coming into existence. And it was very curious because you said something cool. You said the president was a normal person, a normal
Uh-huh.
woman, or a normal man. And then once labeled president is totally different because we have a different conceptual. I don't think I'm going to say labeling. I'm going to say identifying, right? Let's say,
Mhm.
or a different conceptual um, mental map. We've created this in our minds, this
Mhm.
conceptual object, which we can label president, right? But the weird thing are we identify as president, but really, do we have to name the president for it to be the president? We all have to agree this person has the power. We all have to give them power, etc.
Uh-huh.
But is it the actual label? And is like a I just thought the labeling part to me seems not essential for this idea that things do have to be do exist on the basis of previous cause, and dependent origination and cause and conditions lead to to something. Nothing exists independent of causes, but could something exist independent of labels? I've got this sounds really difficult for me. Maybe you want to talk
Yeah.
about, or this is this a good time to sort of address that?
Well, I think it goes back to that discussion that we didn't go into in a great amount of detail, and where in the book it talks about, going back to the animals and children that are pre language, right, or no language, right,
Mm,
and and how, I mean, this is something that's hidden to us, but how they are still able to navigate the world without, in the absence of language. Um,
yeah.
so. I'm not sure I can, say anything more than that, but it's worth
Well,
going
I
back.
would I would guess they're identifying still. They're still labeling, maybe not with the English language, but
Right.
if they find those feral children in the jungles who never had parents and never had human contact,
Mm-hmm.
they can still find two feral children from different jungles who have not ever learned a language in the conventional sense, but do they not have identifying and labeling? And would they be able to like understand the same? Would they have conventional um, would they see things as existing conventionally because they're both two people of different languages, different
Yeah.
cultures, see
Yeah,
things and
no.
understand them, right?
Right. But I think that we can be safe uh in assuming that they would still be subject to thinking that everything exists inherently, just like we do, right? With or without the labeling part.
But they would be labeling, in fact, I guess, because even though they're not using language, they're still labeling
Yeah.
this by mental concept, right?
Yeah, there's still conceptuality going on with, I mean, yeah,
Like they're thinking, oh, that fire is warmth for me. Warmth is a label for them, I guess, even though they're not saying the word warmth in their mind. But so the question is, why is labeling a requirement for seeing, for the misunderstanding, that which must be denied, the idea that something exists inherently, exists in our minds as if it exists inherently
hmm.
because of, I don't know, it only exists because of labeling and cause and condition, but we think it does not, right? But I'm just not so sure I'm aware of, I mean, I'm very aware of cause and condition, but I'm not aware of the act of labeling when I'm seeing things as inherently existing. Am I labeling or not? And what is labeling exactly? It's more than just saying the word president, obviously. Could be that, but it could be other
Right.
things.
But yeah, I think it's not just the word, it's the fact that you're associating a definition that's based on an assumption of a function that's performed by the object.
Yeah,
that
so it's more
has
like the designation,
existence.
designating with our mind, designating that that is a
Conceiving it.
function of that option. Yeah, or conceiving even.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think those are all synonyms.
yeah. It's very difficult for me to get my head around it. I'm sure other people have better ideas. I'll
It's a toughie.
turn off my mic here.
Yeah. But it's worth going back in the text and taking another look at that passage. And then also it's explained a little bit more in that in Genlam Rinpoche's book. Okay, so that would be a good question to ask Geshe Darge. Okay, so we're going to move on to happiness and unhappiness, virtue and non-virtue. Changing topics here. We're now moving on to chapter 3. Quite different. So I'm not going to go through every word in the book here, but if you're in the book, the section is the relationship between emotional states of feelings, the feelings of being happy and unhappy, and how does that relate to moral ethics, right? There's an ethical dimension to our experience. Okay. So there's a very interesting quote. Did I put this on the slide? Right, let me see. Oh, yes, I did. Oh, God, you guys are just so lucky. It is on the slide. Feelings and ethics. Here we go. The wording is kind of very similar, so you have to really pay attention. But the main point is that we're looking at the difference between pleasant feelings, so that's in this first sentence, right? And then painful feelings and the relationship between the feelings and virtuous and non-virtuous states, okay? So here, when someone feels a certain kind of pleasant feeling, non-virtuous states increase in him and virtuous states diminish. So that's one possibility. But when someone feels another kind of pleasant feeling, non-virtuous states diminish in him and virtuous states increase. Okay. So one example might be if for this first one, pleasant feeling a certain kind of pleasant feeling, non-virtuous states increase and virtuous states diminish. An example of that might be if you feel happy because you stole a car, right? So feeling happy, that's the pleasant feeling. The non-virtuous state is that you stole the car, and so you're going to experience negative karma. And so because the non-virtuous state increases, then the corresponding, the opposite, the virtuous state would have to diminish, right? Yeah, so that's the impact. And then for the second clause, but when someone feels another kind of pleasant feeling, then non-virtuous states diminish and virtuous states increase. So an example of that might be you could just generously give your car to somebody who really needs it, some needy person, and then feel very happy. Okay, so that's an example of a pleasant feeling happy. Your virtuous state increases because you're giving the car away, you're acquiring virtue, and the non-virtuous state would diminish, right? And then here, the second situation would be here when someone feels a certain kind of painful feeling, non-virtuous states increase in him and virtuous states diminish. So let's just stop there. So I can give the example before we read the second one, and then we get all confused. So for that one, it would be like you're feeling so mad. You're so mad that your car was stolen, that, non-virtuous states increase. That could be like, you're so mad that somebody stole your car that you get really, really angry. And so you just, take a hammer and you bash away at somebody else's car, in the parking lot, or you just, break somebody else's window just randomly because you're in this, overtaken by rage, right? But okay, and I'm continuing, but when someone feels another kind of painful feeling, non-virtuous states diminish in him and virtuous states increase. So that one's a little bit harder to understand, but the example might be you are completely broke, you don't have enough money, and so you go to Walmart and you shoplift, snatch a loaf of bread or something to put on the dinner table for your kids. So in this case, the painful feeling is that, but then the thing here is that you decide not to do that. You decide to practice, morality, ethical restraint. You're not going to do it because you think, uh-oh, karma is going to catch up with me, right? So even though you're hungry because you didn't steal the bread, you're respecting the laws of karma. And your virtuous state increases, right? Okay. So, so I thought that was a really interesting section. And I'm sorry for just sort of jumping in without doing much of prefacing in terms of the change of topic, going from emptiness to emotions. But I hope that you've been reading the book, so that wasn't like too much of a surprise. So that's something to mull over. And again, it gives us something to use as a way of evaluating maybe our own, thought process, our own behavior, our own intentions, our own motivations as we bumble our way, through the course of a day. Because we come up with these, decisions, these moral choices based on our feelings, right? Pleasant or unpleasant feelings, pretty much all the time. You're making these choices that can have an ethical dimension to them that we need to be very, very careful about. Okay. Any questions about that before we move on? The next topic is constructive and destructive emotions. That's the next section header in the book. All right, so we're going to look at attachment or desire. Sometimes it's translated as desire. So this is interesting because the author's His Holiness doesn't go through all of the. I thought, oh well, this is going to be a presentation of the 6 root mental afflictions, right? But actually, it's not. He picked out just attachment, fear, let's see, anger, and disillusionment. It's a very interesting choice. So I thought we would just take a quick look at each of these. So for attachment, there's a difference here between healthy attachment. Healthy attachment is like the closeness, that sense of connection between living beings, like families, or the healthy love or attachment that a bodhisattva has, for all sentient beings. So that's the healthy attachment, not to be confused with, like sticky attachment or contaminated attachment that is underlain related to self-cherishing. Okay, so that's healthy attachment. And then going on, taking a closer look at sort of the non-virtuous attachment. Then we have another slide. So we've got, I thought this was interesting. We've got the 3 poisons. That's one way of presenting our problem. Our problem is that we were contaminated by those 3 poisons of ignorance, attachment, and hatred. And then if you look side by side, with the 6 root mental afflictions, you'll see that ignorance, attachment, and hatred, track 1 for 1 between the 3 poisons and the 6 root mental afflictions. And you just have to tack on arrogance, deluded doubt, and wrong view. And then you get, ta-da, the 6 root mental afflictions. So that's pretty interesting. Arrogance is sometimes translated as pride. Okay, so that's how you get the 3 poisons and the 6 root mental afflictions. And in case you're wondering how the Tibetan monks, Sangha, or Tibetan scholars, how anybody manages to memorize all of these, long lists, right? In Tibetan, in Buddhism, there, or maybe Buddhism in general, I guess, there are many, 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 many lists, right? Categories of objects to memorize. And I noticed that because I have a terrible, terrible memory, and if you're memorizing it in English, it's actually seems quite daunting, quite difficult, because the words are kind of long and they have many syllables. In Tibetan, one of the beauties of the language is that, they'll turn this list of 6 things into, each one would probably be like, when they're memorizing, like 1 syllable. So you can, I'm not even going to try to do this, but, instead of trying to memorize all these different syllables, it would be like a list of 6 syllables for the 6 root mental afflictions. And there's a certain rhythm to it, so it makes it more easy to memorize. So exaggerated attachment. Exaggerated attachment is, attachment that we've added something added superlatives to something. This is the most beautiful remote control, on the face of the earth. This is the most delicious glass of water that ever existed. So that exaggerated attachment then, causes us to cling and to grasp and to want more and more, right? And so, it's likewise, with ourselves, we tend to project qualities desirable qualities. We project expectations, on ourselves, and as well as, on others. That makes it very difficult, to maintain a stable friendship or relationship. And so in that sense, as we add on all of these, it's almost like spinning a fiction, this fictitious web, we're creating an illusion of who we are and who we want to be, right? And then we have to defend and maintain and protect, that facade. And so anger and other negative emotions that are closely related to attachment, they just come together like in groups. These related negative afflictions arise. Right? So I was trying to think of a funny example. So I was thinking, well, like if you have a hand, right? So if you have a thumb, right? So maybe thumb is like the attachment. If you see the thumb, then you probably have all the other fingers too. Right? And if the other fingers could be like the anger, the jealousy, the greed, the malice, or whatever, right? So when you put all of these, fingers together and you make them into a big fist, when you have this big fist of negative emotions, then you can really do some damage, right? Okay. And so this idea of exaggerated attachment is also explained in the book. His Holiness writes, if someone's appreciation for his country makes him suspicious of foreigners on the basis of nationality or ethnicity alone, then attachment has set in. This emotion can cause prejudice and discrimination, and a person may go so far as to deny others their human rights. So that's a very important point, and something that we're seeing on a global scale, very much so right now. And so I think that's related to the pride or arrogance associated with our own, self-cherishing, and to our own, personal qualities, like it's my country. So my country has got to be better than the next guy's country because it's my country, my homeland, right? Okay. So that's a little bit about attachment and its place and its role as it relates to the other mental afflictions and poisons. So then fear. Well, fear was an interesting choice because, if you look at the list of the 6 mental afflictions, is fear on the list? Explicitly on the list? No. So fear refers to anxiety or stress. We all know what fear is. But it's closely related to these mental afflictions. So, we could say that fear often underlies anger, insecurities that we may feel in relation to, our others, stemming from a lack of self-confidence, a lack of, trust in ourselves and trust in others. So fear, is at the bottom of a lot of the anger that we might encounter in ourselves as well as in others. So it comes down to fear and the sense of insecurity. And then also, I think there's a fear of change in general, right? How will, a change affect me, right? Again, going back to self-cherishing, maybe to the innate sense of survival, right? Survival instinct, fear of change, that's a biggie, right? And there's that sort of more global sense, there are many, many things also to be fearful of, right? So we've got climate change, cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, the pace of technological and environmental change is really unprecedented. Okay, so lots of stuff to be afraid of. No, I'm kidding. And so it's related to, like resource guarding, right? All of this is related to resource guarding, trying to defend, ourselves, our homes, our possessions, related to resource guarding. And so from the dog training world, we don't want our dogs to, guard the couch or guard their toys, guard their bones, guard their food bowl, right? But when you think about it, we do exactly the same thing. Okay. So anyway, so fear is an example of how, remember in the beginning of the tonight's presentation, we were talking about how the feelings relate to ethics. And so it seems like fear would be an example of having an unpleasant feeling, and that causes us to act in non-virtuous ways. Okay? So our non-virtuous mental states increase because we act out of self-cherishing, and so we're more likely to harm others in response to our fear. So His Holiness writes, from a Buddhist viewpoint, this kind of fear is afflictive because it is based on exaggeration and self-preoccupation, and it leads a person to engage in actions or make decisions that are unwise. So there are essentially two kinds of fear. So His Holiness talks about panicky fear. So this is the exaggerated, distorted, mistaken type of fear that's rooted in ignorance and that perpetuates, samsara through non-virtuous actions. But then there's also, they point out, like a wisdom fear. This is like a healthy, common sense type of fear based on reality. So that means, if you're driving down the highway and the car next to you swerves towards you, then the healthy, smart thing to do is to, slow down or move over to the next lane to avoid a collision. That's the wisdom fear, common sense, right? And then by understanding the disadvantages of rebirth in samsara and the horrors of cyclic existence, right? Then that gives rise to, again, this kind of wise fear that based on which, that's like a impetus. It's like a driving force that helps us find liberation from samsara. That's why in the Lamrim, the first section so heavily focused on understanding the types of suffering, the many, many, many different types of suffering, and then death and impermanence, right? All of that is used to cultivate this wisdom fear. And based on that type of wisdom fear, then that gives rise to seeking, a profound, sincere, heartfelt sense of taking refuge in the Triple Gem. And the next discussion in the book is on anger. And since we were just talking about anger on Sunday, and Geshe Dage has been talking about it, I'm sure, as well, then I'm not going to, try to summarize the whole section. I just wanted to pick up one point, which is an important one, where His Holiness talks about social injustice. What's the best way to respond to situations that we encounter that are examples of, social injustice. And there's no shortage of those around. But while our initial, emotional response is often is anger, right? And we want to fight back, go into the streets and, protest and shout and, throw rocks or whatever. In the long run, again, when you think of what the more effective response would be, it's going to be finding a compassion-based approach to resolving these issues of social injustice. And so, we pretty much all know that, right? That's not necessarily saying anything all that earth-shattering, right? The importance of dialogue and negotiations and diplomacy and as a long-term way of finding a peaceful resolution to conflict is, I think, widely acknowledged to lead to better results than violence. Okay, so then the next topic is disillusionment. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to jump ahead to see how much more is left. Okay, no, we have plenty of time. Disillusionment is, again, not one of the 6 root mental afflictions. I'm not even sure where it is. I didn't have time to go back and double check the list of 51 mental factors. But anyway, disillusionment is defined as, that feeling that we're disappointed that things didn't turn out the way we thought that they would, right? That situation doesn't meet our expectations. And so it's, it's a negative emotion. And it's like another example would be maybe, you voted for somebody who promised a certain, dream, right? That certain things would change in certain ways, certain policies would be made. And you were really excited about that. You thought, yes, I'm voting for that candidate. But, in the end, due to circumstances and conditions, then those promises may not end up being delivered. And so you may, be very disillusioned, even disgusted with the way things had turned out. And you might think, oh, forget it. I'm not voting for that person again. Or, I'm not voting, period. I'm just going to back out of this whole political nightmare. So that's one way of thinking about disillusionment. And then another way, His Holiness explains how to use the emotion of disillusionment in a positive way. And that could be when you think of it as a means to, again, to break free from the sufferings of samsara. Right? So the first stage is to generate the sense of profound renunciation. Right? You want to break free from samsara, and that implies a certain amount of, disillusionment with the state of suffering. So without that, then you're never going to take the first step onto the path to freedom. Okay. Any comments on that before we move on to the next section, which is emotions and survival?
I do. Would you say disillusionment and disappointment are kind of the same in this context, which you described, or different?
Yeah, I think they're very closely related.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe disillusionment is like a little stronger, maybe a little more like a bigger idea. Like I could be disappointed that my coffee is cold. I'm
Right.
gonna put it in the microwave before
Got
I
it.
drink it, but I'm not disillusioned necessarily.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I thought about that too. I think it's more like a dream that didn't come true.
I mean, that's such an interesting question because sometimes we think, oh, disappointment is something like trivial, like the coffee. Disillusion is something that is, you had a strong, I don't know, conviction of some sort that might have been like,
Uh-huh.
philosophical for you. And then now you're disillusioned. It's almost like, it's like almost like you've decided the world's not worth participating in, or you're
Right.
withdrawing your energy
Right.
stuff. So it seems so much less trivial, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay.
Richard, would that be like that strong conviction that you just described, would that be sort of in the same vein as attachment?
It could be mixed with that, right? Like if we're so convinced that the 8 worldly dharmas are that we'll find happiness if we could only get, the 8 worldly dharmas, or at least the 4 of them, right? If we get the wealth, we have the fame, the reputation, the praise, right? If I'm convinced that that's what will make me happy, and then it doesn't happen, wow, I'm disillusioned with, capitalism. I'm disillusioned
It's all,
with my society, right?
yeah,
Or
yeah. I mean, is that
samsara.
Janet?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're really onto something here because, it's like if you have a strong philosophical belief and it's taken away.
Hmm.
I can remember at the end of the Second World War, there was a big movement like God is dead movement that led to existentialism and all these things. And it seemed to be
Mhm.
a deep, profound disillusionment, but it still was a form of attachment. And yet it was somehow that the Dalai Lama is saying you can use this attachment that leads to your disillusionment, and then turn it into something positive by like, okay,
Right.
using that to, and the same with this idea of fear, like you can use fear towards bravery. I mean, if
Hmm.
you're not
Hmm.
experiencing fear, it's that you don't have the intelligence to see what's going on,
Hmm.
and but if you do
Right.
experience fear, it's you see what's going on, but you can turn that into something positive like bravery. It seems like the discussion seems to be much more noble when you
Exactly.
look past the trivial and into the deeper things. I think a lot of people get I think despair is an example also of deep disillusionment, but it still can lead to a strength. It seems like.
Yeah.
So I think it is attachment that we're talking about either way, but turning into a virtuous reaction to that. Reaction to
Mhm.
your attachment, which is disillusionment, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
Thanks.
Good points, you guys. Okay, the last section that we're going to cover tonight. Yep. Emotions and survival. And again, this is something that we've talked about before. So evolutionary biologists talk a lot about survival of the fittest and fight or flight. These being, innate, instincts that we as living beings are subject to. And so, from their perspective, anger and the other emotions are innate responses that help keep us alive so that we can perpetuate our genes, right? Reproducing is the name of the game if you're an evolutionary biologist, explaining that's their paradigm, I think. So then from a Buddhist perspective, these emotions, such as anger and the like, are considered negative. And so let's look at that again. Let's see. This is a little bit of a restatement of what we've been talking about. Um, so there's a quote that says, the difficulty with these emotions, again, is that they're fueled by exaggeration and grasping, and they don't perform their function in a reasonable way. I like that. They're not performing in a reasonable way. So when somebody's giving you a hard time, you just say, you're not performing in a reasonable way. Because it's so true. They may exaggerate the potential danger of the situation, the primacy of one's own self-interest, or the potential benefit to be gained. When afflictions are manifest, our minds are clouded and we don't think clearly. Instead of responding to a situation intelligently, we react impulsively, following an urge without sufficiently contemplating the likely effects of doing so, right? You're so mad, you're in a blind rage. That's what we call it. That's the term, right? A blind rage means that you go and you kill your father um, because haven't thought about the consequences of a long life in prison, etc. In some conflicts, anger exposes us to far greater danger by making us act irrationally, which incites the other party to counter with more violent means. Fear also can endanger our survival, for when we exaggerate danger, we may lash out, even when the threat is non-existent or minor. So if you're always in a very heightened state of fear, even when somebody just bumps into you, you're just like, ah! and you attack them. We may freeze when it would be wiser to act, or we may act heedlessly in our panic. It is especially tragic when a government or its citizens collectively fall into these distorted emotions. So, bottom line summary for that quote, I think, is that fear and anger are not based on reason. They're not, there's no intelligent reasoning underlying these emotions. So they may increase instead of decrease our chances of survival. And not only that, but, they can, when our minds are subject to such powerful negative emotions, then we can put everybody around us at risk as well. So this is, again, a reminder of how distorted perception, or rather distorted attention, and our superimposition of our opinions and, all this conceptual, nonsense, all of the fake news, all of that just stirs up, fear and anger in ourselves and in everyone else. Oh, and another example of the realistic fear meaning fear that will keep us alive, that's intelligent, would be like evacuating before a hurricane, instead of being too proud, thinking, oh, I've survived 30 or 40 years of hurricanes, here in my little bungalow, and so I'll be just fine. I don't need to evacuate. I think the meteorologist is just lying for political reasons or something, right? I'm just going to stay in my little bungalow, and then, well, that doesn't always end happily, right? That's meaning that's an example of not having realistic fear. Okay, so then another interesting point, another quote here. Some psychologists say that disturbing emotions are 90% exaggeration and projection. While there may be a biological component, exaggeration and projection come from the mind, and we are not generally aware when they step in. A sense of danger that is reasonable in one instance can later be exaggerated and projected onto many other situations, making a person unnecessarily anxious. So they're saying that even though, maybe you have one bad experience, then, as you think about it over and over again, you remember that experience, you talk about it with your friends, then, that situation starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start to apply, let's say it's being alone in general, just being alone, right? And let's say you were attacked and you were alone, right? I mean, that's just, of course, it's terrifying. But unfortunately, if you think about it over and over again, then you're going to start getting paranoid, right? You're going to be not unnecessarily, you're going to be really, really anxious whenever you're alone. And that's, obviously very often, more often than not. And so the anger that produces the rush of adrenaline that helps us to protect ourselves becomes a habit. So it's almost like, you get addicted to that adrenaline. And we create drama and conflict in our lives because the resulting adrenaline makes us feel alive. So that's a pretty strong statement. It was interesting. I don't know if that would be so much an intentional habit, maybe more like an unconscious habit, or like a tendency that we're familiar with. I don't know if it's like an intentional habit, But that's something to keep in mind and to watch out for, to see if that rings true, in our own experience. Could be, there's certainly a lot of drama queens and drama kings out there. So maybe they're all just adrenaline junkies. And they like to create conflict and wherever they go because they enjoy that adrenaline hit. And so I think I've shared this example many times, but I'm very short-sighted and I'm having vision problems. And my dog, Camille, she, bless her heart, she's a little bit reactive with other dogs. So when I'm walking down the road, I'm always scanning for people with dogs. I gotta look behind me. Yeah, I gotta look ahead of me. Looking for people with dogs. But since I can't see very well, and I have to see the dog before she does, and she's gifted with, an amazing power of sense, right? Her nose sense, she can smell things from miles away. So she's, got a leg up on me. So I'm looking at shadows, trees, mailboxes. They all look like people with dogs. So that means that, as I'm walking around, I'm not as relaxed as I should be. So that's a gross example of mistaken appearance, right? So other ones might be let's say, you get COVID, right? You get COVID and it turns into long COVID and you're really, really suffering as a result. You can't go to work and everything. And so, then you're going to be anxious, you're going to be scared. But I think that's more an example of realistic fear, because then you're going to be cautious. You're going to take greater care. You're going to wear masks all the time. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not quite sure where I was going with that, but with the COVID situation, but I think the walking the dog example is better in terms of fear becoming a habit. Okay. So then I just wanted to wrap up at anything. I'm going to move on to how to apply emptiness and dependent arising in daily life. I don't know what that has to do. That's kind of a non sequitur with talk about emotions. It's bizarre. Well, anyway, yeah, we're going to go flip back to the previous topic. Any questions or anything you want to share about the section about emotions?
Yeah, I'll try to initiate discussion if you want by just saying, look, sometimes there's a difference between, anger and skillful wrath. And we often use the example of, an athlete is able to get pumped up for something.
Right.
It appears to be anger, like it could be, especially in competitive sports like, what do you call it, martial arts. At the world champion level, the coach of a martial arts program will say, the moment you experience anger, you've lost. Ferocity and building up adrenaline and building up testosterone and having those powerful hormones and directing them skillfully and making your kicks hit and making your punches hit is very different. At the Olympic level. They don't experience anger, which is out of control. They experience this other thing, which is very controlled. Also, I think the example often used in Buddhism is like when a mother stops the child from running in front of traffic and says very firmly, it's not anger. They're not trying to harm the child.
Right.
And in the same way, the Olympic athlete who's involved in martial arts actually respects their opponent and trying to bring about the most, skillful means in the opponent as well as themselves. It's very different than anger, which is the loss of. And I think with fear, it's the same thing. You're talking about this intelligent fear and unintelligent fear, I think, very well. I mean, if you're unintelligently fearful, it's as if it's out of control. You're not controlling it. It's controlling you.
Yeah.
versus if you recognize correctly the car beside you, you use that example, swerving, it's you're controlling the situation, but you're using skillful fear, skillful means. So I think the key word in everything you've been describing to us, I think a word you could use is skillful or unskillful.
Yeah.
If it's
That's good.
skillful, it's very different than if it's unskillful. And I think that was really cool. This idea of emotions can be helping our survival if we do it skillfully, and they can be destroying our survival if we do it unskillfully. So this was a really great discussion. I'm going to read the book again. This is really good. Thank you. And somebody else might want to talk. I'm sorry for talking so much. I'm just excited.
No, it's great. Cynthia, you've got your hand raised.
Hi, I have a question. Can you define further what the difference is of deluded doubt and wrong view? In my mind, deluded doubt seems to be wrong view, but if you could just explain it a little bit more, thanks.
Oh, that's a great question. So my understanding is that deluded doubt was doubt where, right, so these two are not really emotional afflictions per se, as we were, as you know, like the other guys on the list. So deluded doubt seems to be when you're thinking about things, you're investigating and analyzing the way things exist, the nature of reality. But it's diluted in the sense that, you know, so you're asking questions, but you're starting to go down the wrong track, maybe. You're heading in the wrong direction. You know, maybe you're heading towards a nihilistic view or something. Whereas wrong view, you know, we know is the misunderstanding of the nature of reality, like thinking that things exist inherently, or if you don't go that far, maybe, you know, some of the other tenets presentations.
So it looks like if I keep having deluded doubt, I could end up with wrong view. Would that be a correct
Maybe.
way to also think about it?
That's the way I was thinking about it, but it would be good to
Okay.
go back and double check. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. Okay, so we're gonna push on here because we have just a couple of minutes left. So how to apply emptiness and dependent arising in daily life? Thinking that things are merely designated. Oh yes, here were some ideas we had here. Right. I know what happened. This was the carryover from the last class because I ran out of time to do this, and so I tacked it on to the end of this class. Okay, so one idea would be to, as you go around in your daily life, just keep repeating to yourself or looking at things with from the perspective of that things are merely designated. Meaning that they exist, but they don't exist inherently. So you can say, this actually goes back to the Sunday class discussion of the third person, thinking of things in the third, yourself as from the reference of a third person perspective. It's the same idea. Instead of saying, this is me, you know, based on this body and mind, this is me, right? You could say, this is called me, you know, this is Losang Tendrol. She is talking, right? Or you could say, yeah, so something like that. Just try to think of yourself in the third person. Very effective. Or the one who is called Joe is doing blah 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 blah. Or Lee, the student whose name is Lee, he was here on Sunday and he said he thinks of himself as this one. This one is reading the book. You know, and I'm laughing, but actually it's I think it's a very skillful technique to try to, get away from the self-cherishing me, myself, and I. Okay. So then another idea might be to, oops, where's my thing? Oh, it's jumping. Is it this one? Hang on one second. Yeah, oh, this is it. Okay. So it's to watch the process of how things come into existence for us at any given time. So, I think we talked about this in the last class, but see how something, how do we perceive it with our sense faculties, right? So I'm presenting this, showing you this image because it's kind of hard to see what's going on, or it's hard to understand what the picture is of, right? You're looking at it, it looks very abstract. So you can feel your mind thinking, God, what is that, right? And so your mind it's only visual because, you can't smell the air, the fragrance of the air, or, the birds in the trees, or the coolness of the day. All the other senses, unfortunately, are not captured in this still image. But, again, as whatever we're experiencing, we can break it down into the sensory components, right? And then you see how your mind is trying to apply labels. It's trying to make sense of this image by breaking down the colors and the shapes. And, unfortunately, it's not a video, so there's no movement. But you can see that then the next step is it gives rise to feelings, right? And conceptions and labelings and all the other mental factors. So there's this, process of something appearing to our sense consciousnesses, and then there's this apprehension, this conception, all of that kind of arises. And then if it's a pleasant experience, then maybe some clinging, and grasping ensue. And then maybe the language, you say to yourself, in whatever languages you feel most comfortable in, probably English, but maybe not. Whatever language you feel more comfortable in, you're going to express this in words and terms, right? You're going to say to yourself, well, you know what I think that is? I think she took a picture of the bottom of a stream. And you can see the rocks and the leaves and the reflection of the tree branches and the sky. That's what it is, right? You say that to yourself in your language, right? And as you're saying that to yourself, then feelings might arise. Like you might think of a similar experience that you had. Maybe it brings you back to the edge of a stream on a November day. So it could provoke, trigger some kind of happy memory. Or, I hope this doesn't happen. It could provoke a sad memory, or maybe some anxiety if you don't like water. You might think, oh no. Okay. So I think that's, one technique is, again, just this, using any experience that you have and breaking it down in that way. All right, and then finally, kind of related. All right, we broke this down into little concepts. Stop, breathe, and think. Then each of these are related. So stop, I think, is renunciation, or related to disillusionment. Stopping the desire, the craving for cyclic existence. That's the first step. Stop, renunciation. Breathe. Okay, we all know what breathe is. Breathe is, like shamatha, the mental and physical ease, or pliancy and bliss that arises from shamatha meditation, from having a concentrated mind, from having a concentrated, non-conceptual mind. That's the breathe. And then think. That's the investigation and analysis that we need to do to be able to overcome, to refute the object of negation. The object of negation is inherent existence. Okay, so being able to overcome the ignorance consciousness, the mistaken consciousness of ignorance, and instead giving rise to wisdom consciousness, right? So here we are. This is perceive. Perceive means perceiving ultimate reality. That's it. That is totally it. It is 8:27. We're going to do our closing prayers. And that's it for tonight. Stop the share. The other share. Hang on. Share. Prayers for one room teaching. Share. Oh. Prayers at the end of the teaching. Saji Puki Drushe Meto Tram Rira Blinji Nide Gempadi Songe Jingdu Mingde Muayi Joku Namda Jingla Chupa Iram Guru Rana Mandala Kamnereatayam Jangchub Sim Chogrim Pochi Mage Panam Ke Gyurchi Ke Panyam Pa Me Padam Gong Me Gong Du Pewasho. In the land surrounded by mountains of snow, you are the source of all benefit and joy, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends, so that your holy deeds may bless the nature of fortunate disciples, and that the Lord of 10 powers teaching and realization spread, supreme lamp who shows the path to the intelligent, may you live long and your virtuous deeds triumph. That's a nice translation. The soul medicine that dispels all the illnesses of grasping at extremes, the profound meaning of dependent origination that is free of extremes, and the intention of the supreme Arya Nagarjuna and his spiritual successors. I dedicate this virtue as a cause for properly understanding these. By this virtue, may all beings perfect the accumulations of merit and wisdom and achieve the 2 holy bodies that arise from merit and wisdom. That's okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Annie.
All right. Good night.
Night. There we go.